Righty, okay, we are going to start with our final lesson on Perissodactylans, the odd-toed ungulates. We've covered rhinos and tapirs, and we're working our way on to the final group, the equines, the horses, zebras, donkeys. So, the book of the week is not related to horses in any way, but it's if you come from Southern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, it's a book that you should probably read. It's a book called Canis Africanus. Fairly hard to track down, but you can still pick up a few copies if you look around. It's about the history of the Africanus breed, short stories, biological history, its evolution, and it's linked to people in Sub-Saharan Africa, and it's a really interesting book with a collection of stories and studies in it. Okay, so we're going to be talking about equine evolution. The entire process took quite a long time, and equines evolved in North America. One of the earliest species was Mesohippus, which eventually evolved into Merychibus. Pliohippus came later, and finally the Equus species, which are the most recent. And they increased in size, and also their foot structure changed significantly over time. So another name is known by is Hyracotherium, very similar to a hyrax, but in no way related, just some convergent evolution. It's also otherwise known as Eohippus, and it had a very, very primitive foot structure. It stood on 3 to 4 toes, very similar to the Artiodactylans, again, very loosely related though. And he was around for 56 million to 50 million years ago. And he would have looked like this, almost like, again, one of those hyracoids that we'll be talking about in the upcoming elephant lessons. So you'll get to see the similarities. And again, very similar foot structure, walked on 4 toes, 3 toes with later species. They were very small, only around 40 centimeters tall, and they were adapted for forests and woodlands. And the teeth were more suited to browsing than for grazing, so they were more for cropping and crushing branches. Again, just due to the habitats at the time, there were more foresty environments and not as many grasslands. And most of mammal evolution occurred for more of a browsing habitat. Aurorhipis started to occur around 50 million years ago, and he became gradually more specialized. He will look like this, and you can see there's some vestigial similarities or some very obscure similarities to modern horses, but again, very primitive. They were taller, increasing in size. They were, remember this diversification, so there would have been bigger species and smaller species, and the fossil evidence is mostly found amongst larger specimens, but we probably would have found smaller specimens as well. What we did notice is that with the change in the environment, grasslands are becoming more and more prevalent, like they did also in Africa. About 4 million years ago, grasslands in Africa started to occur, where it was mostly forests and bush. And the same things happened in North America. And because of this ecological pressure, species started to evolve for a more grassland environment. Taller, slimmer animals started to occur. And they were more elongated in their build, and they were adapted for jumping because they weren't necessarily skulking in bush anymore. They started walking on 3 toes due to various specializations, and they were still very much a browser indicated by their dental structure. Mesohippus started to occur from around 40 million to 30 million years ago. And again, you can see a lot of similarities with modern horses. Again, one of the key differences here is the foot structure. They're walking on 3 toes, much like our rhinos and our tapirs. And North American climates changed drastically, and prairies took over from where many of the forests occurred. So frost started to occur, fire started to occur, global temperatures changed, and prairies, grasslands became the norm in vast tracts of America. So there was this ecological pressure to evolve for a more grassland type animal. And woodland animals gradually died out or stayed in the woodlands. So Africa, by contrast, has got a wonderful variety of habitats. So you get this, our antelope species are very varied, but with the Perissodactylans, there wasn't as much specification that we know of. They evolved to be long-legged, faster, and more adapted for grasslands. They evolved robust grinding teeth and stronger jaws. Now, this was again indicative of the fact that they were adapting toward eating grasses, which required far more breaking down. And they still walked on 3 toes, but the 4th and 5th toe were vestigial. They were there, but they served no function. Okay, much like tapirs today actually still have those vestigial toes. Myohippus, we're getting closer towards our modern time, still quite a way away, 30 million to 24 million years ago. And for all intents and purposes, you would mistake him for a modern horse. And they were still much smaller than modern horses, no more than a meter, maybe 1.2 meters. And they were highly adapted to grasslands. And they were starting to, they were widespread across the plains of North America. Now, remember, they didn't occur in the Old World yet. They were not able to cross through the Bering Straits, through Beringia, into the Old World from the New World. So they were only found throughout the New World. And they were the last of the three-toe horses. So they walked on three toes, much like a rhino did, but very, very primitive three toes. Merychippus is considered to be one of the first modern true horses. And again, very similar to modern horses in all respect. And again, you would still find these vestigial toes, back toes, but they were completely off the ground. They had no interaction. And gradually, nature is ruthless, evolution is ruthless. Anything that's unnecessary tends to get weeded out of the gene pool because it's just unnecessary energy consumption. So individuals that grew smaller and smaller toes would just have a slight genetic edge over individuals that didn't grow smaller and smaller toes. And you would have this competition occurring, and it was more efficient to walk on one toe. So the prairies continued to thrive in North America as they do today. Merychippus walked wholly on one toe, but still had two visible but unused back toes. And they were the size of smaller breed ponies, and numerous fossils have been found, indicating that they were very successful. They thrived in the prairies of North America. Pliohippus was around from 15 million years ago to 5 million years ago, fairly recently actually. And for all intents and purposes, we don't know they had stripes. We speculate they had stripes because a lot of equine species have stripes. So we say, well, most of them have stripes. These ones probably also had stripes. Because again, we don't have the skin color in the fossil records or the hair color. And they were almost as large as modern horses and very widespread and very successful. Earlier specimens had vestigial toes, where the later fossils only had one. So again, we've seen that transference into true modern horses. And their dentine was effectively the same as modern equines. You wouldn't be able to put them out of place. They were almost identical. The toes were obviously probably one of the biggest indicators that they were slightly different. Now, modern horse skeleton is highly specialized for running. This entire system is built for shock and for endurance running. They I've got these single hooves, which again give them great traction. There are benefits, there are pros and cons to having cloven hooves or having single hooves. Single hooves have actually very successful amongst grassland species, where cloven hooves tend to be better in shrub veld and bush veld due to traction, grip, terrain, that sort of thing. And so here we can actually see the gradual evolution over time from Hyracotherem or Eorhipis through Mesohippus, Merychippus, Pliochippus, and finally to the modern Equus species, taking around 50 million years. So it doesn't happen overnight. Modern equines have this really, really robust jaw for chewing and crushing. They have very simple incisors and canines. The males have a second set of incisors called the stallion teeth. Sorry, a second set of canines, which they call the stallion teeth, that they apparently use for fighting. And they have very robust molars, which they use for grinding down their vegetation, their grasses, and those really thick, heavy jaws, again, indicative of their lifestyle. Chewing and grinding is really important. And today, there are currently 7 species of equine alive. They're large, they don't need to diversify that much, and regional diversification is really the only reason why they are different species, but horses thrive everywhere, all over the world. Now, while equines evolved in North America, they spread and have adapted to a variety of environments in the whole world, everywhere throughout Asia and Africa. And there were numerous species, genera, and families over the last 30 million years ago, and we're having these bottlenecks occur. And this is what happens with evolution and competition. Species that are slightly inferior get outcompeted. They might thrive in their environment, but the moment that new species get introduced, maybe those new species are just slightly better, and something that's had a good run for 40 million years just gets its ass kicked and it dies out. And that's really what's happened with a lot of we'll talk about that with elephants coming up, with the hyracoids in Africa, thriving in Africa until the antelope entered and just outcompeted them. And the hyrax diversity is minimal today, but for about 40 million years ago, it was extremely diverse. The same with the equines. They had extremely high diversity, and but due to mostly antelope competition and primate competition and a variety of other organisms, their smaller forms have been kicked out of the game, and the larger forms are the only ones that are around. Like all perissodactyls, diversity has plummeted over the last 30 million years. Sorry, the last few million years. And all species of equines are so closely related that they can actually interbreed. And that's only because they've crossed over from North America into the old world only a few million years ago. So the gene pool is still quite small. We're not talking very small, but small enough that they are that closely related that they can actually interbreed. Like the wolves, the dogs, they're all very closely related. Wolf evolution, dog evolution, as you saw in the dog talks, happened very recently, and that's why there are dogs all over the planet in various forms, but they're very, very closely related. American equines were thought different enough to be different from all species to be categorized into different genera. So we have Equus, which is the genus found throughout the world today, only in the old world. There are no living New World species of horses. All the horses in America were imported from the old world by modern humans. But we had a species of horse in North America called Harrington Hippus. Obviously, not at the time it was given that name. And Hippodion from South America. So Harrington Hippus went extinct around 11,000 years ago, around the same time that Native Americans crossed over through Beringia into North America and just hunted them out. Anything that could be caught was eaten. And at this time, there was no domestication of horses, so there was no appeal for that sort of thing. And anything that could be caught was hunted out. And North American species had no idea what humans were. And when humans entered North America, they just obliterated it. So the great North American migration of humans, which we've discussed in other lessons. Harrington Hippus would have looked like this. Again, for all intents and purposes, identical to a donkey or a horse. You wouldn't put them out of place today with any of the other equines. Hippodion, slightly shorter, more robust, almost like a zebra in many respects in its build. Quite tough and quite robust, and adapted for their mountainous South American environment. So both two different species built for different environments. Really interesting that they were around for so long, but unfortunately, a lot of people argue that it wasn't humans that wiped them out, but it's just this coincidence that keeps occurring wherever you have humans suddenly colonize an area in history. All of a sudden, the megafauna just goes extinct over the next 100 or 1,000 years. They just die out immediately. And human apologists, especially native people apologists, they will swear blind that native people have never caused an extinction ever, but humans are humans and we wipe things out. It doesn't matter what skin color you are, black, brown, green, yellow, whatever. White people, we wiped out countless animals throughout Europe. Native Americans wiped out countless species. Native Aboriginals wiped out countless species. We're all accountable for mass extinction events. So this nonsense where we talk about native peoples living one with nature, that's pure garbage. They've lived one with nature because they hunted everything else to extinction. And then they realized, holy crap, we have to balance out our lifestyles with nature because we're running out of food. And that's the only reason they live at one with nature, but not because of this humanist, altruistic approach. It's just simply because they realize it's not a sustainable system. Like we have, the only difference is that we figured out domestication instead. So we farm animals now instead of hunting them. But for all intents and purposes, it's the exact same thing. We maintain our populations of animals. It's the same as native people's way of farming. Okay, so today, going on from that, we have 7 species of equus. The first species is the Cape Mountain zebra, limited to the Western Cape, almost hunted to extinction by European hunters back in the day for amusement. But through gradual conservation programs over the last 100 years, their numbers have bounced back. They're still listed as vulnerable and endangered in certain areas. They're only found on the west coast of Africa, around the Cape, and some parts of Namibia. And they're certainly not doing very well, but their numbers have recovered very substantially. And the Burchell zebra, which is the most common zebra found throughout sub-Saharan Africa, right from the Western Cape, through the grasslands of KwaZulu-Natal, the Highveld, through Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, they thrive. They are a fantastic equine, and they're really, really highly adapted for the African environment. You'll notice it's called Equus quagga, and we talk about the quagga going extinct. People think the quagga is actually an extinct species. The subspecies is extinct because a quagga is a subspecies of Burchell zebra. The only difference is that its back hind was white as opposed to fully striped, but it was the same species as Burchell zebra. And there are various efforts to rebreed, to bring them back from extinction through breeding programs. So you'll have a phenotypic equivalent of a quagga bred from Burchell zebra. Grevy's zebra, the most endangered, critically endangered, also the most beautiful because those amazing stripes. And the largest of the zebras, about the size, almost the size of a normal domestic horse, but not quite as big, more streamlined as well. Again, because of his size and because of his beauty, aggressively persecuted by hunters for sport back in the day. And the numbers are recovering. And from area to area, you get in populations with greater or lesser amounts of brown pigmentation or brown coloring to the skin. So some of these individuals, like, this guy's got a bit of brown in his snout there. Some individuals have a lot of brown, some individuals don't have a lot of brown, but it depends on specific populations. So there's no clear-cut answer. So where does the name zebra come from? I've been asked this by people all the time, and actually I didn't know the answer. So I looked this up, and it's actually Latin. So the modern name for zebra is just zebra. It actually comes from classical Portuguese, from zebra, which comes from an old Portuguese. We're talking Portuguese from 1,000 years ago, from esabrero, which comes from Vulgar Latin, from the colonial days of the Romans, which was 2,500 years ago. It comes from the Equines, which literally means wild horse in Latin, in Vulgar Latin, and it comes from classical Latin, equiferus. Equus is horse in Latin, and ferus is wild. So the wild horse. It has gradually over the last 2,000 years been bastardized into zebra. And when you say equiferus and you say zebra, how do those two words line up? But if you see the gradual mimetic evolution of words, there's a big fancy word for you, mimetic evolution. Mimetics are concepts and thoughts and ideas. So you have genetic evolution and mimetic evolution. So from equiferus to zebra over 2,500 years. So zebra stripes have lots of functions. We've talked about in the past about the dazzle camouflage, and that's very well known by guides, conservationists, outdoor enthusiasts. When zebras run en masse, they can dazzle and confuse the predators, and it's very difficult to isolate an individual amongst that mess of colors. It's just very disruptive and very hard to pay attention to. If you remember in the past, we talked about ships during World War II using dazzle camouflage to the same sort of effect. They would have all these convoys going in a row, and German gunners and Japanese gunners were unable to actually identify individual ships and take them out because they didn't know where the key parts of the ships were, where the command stations, where the ammunition bays, where were the supplies, which part was the most important to shoot down, to attack. And you have this really mixed up geometric shapes, and it just confused the hell out of people. And it was very successful before radar. The moment radar came onto the show, it actually became redundant because you were using radar to find your targets and not visual confirmation. But dazzle displays were used less so in World War I, and more so in World War II, to greater and lesser extents depending on the area. Also has been proven to cool the animal, and this is actually something really interesting. I didn't believe it, but there's been a lot of studies and a lot of conclusive positive evidence showing that it actually cools the animal. It creates these microclimates across the animal's backs, hot areas warming faster than the white areas, and because of this, the animal has varying temperatures across the body, creating these little microclimates and little microcurrents of air, which actually surprisingly cools the animal. And they've done thermal studies of completely black horses versus zebras, and they've shown that the zebras actually keep cooler than complete black horses or complete brown horses. So it actually clearly has, you can see the thermal imaging, and the animal is much cooler, or a couple of degrees cooler, which can save your life in the African heat. The last thing it does, and again, I didn't believe this. I heard it from another guide, and he heard it from someone else, and I had to go dig it up and look it up for myself. And yes, it's been proven that it actually helps with fly avoidance. And they've done studies with cows where they plant them with zebra stripes, and flies battle to identify individual targets and land on the animal. They avoid the cattle. So farmers have actually been painting stripes on their cattle, like this poor guy over here, or poor girl, in order to actually to keep the flies with them. And apparently it works quite well. Maybe in Africa, with a lot of the diseases in the future, they'll start experimenting with that with rural communities to keep their cattle alive. Now, continuing from zebras, we're going with more classically known species, the African wild donkey, the ancestor of modern donkeys, Equus africanus, which comes from Ethiopia, actually. So the ancestors of modern donkeys come from Ethiopia. The Kiang, which comes from the plains of Tibet, those known as Equus Kiang. It's also known as the Asian wild donkey. So they did used to extend down into India, but they were hunted out because they were pretty easy to catch. And the only surviving populations hung around Tibet and the highlands of China, where they were safe from people. And yeah, they were hunted aggressively, but they're being conserved, and they're still their numbers are going, but they're not doing too well. The Asiatic wild donkey, or the onaga, is Equus harmonius, which again is a bit of a hybrid between, it's speculated whether this is a purely wild species or a hybrid between a domestic and a wild species. And I'm not going to get into a discussion about that. I don't know enough about it. But you can see they are quite different to the Kiang. The wild horse, which is Equus ferus, found throughout Asia and Europe, has historical range. They were hunted out throughout parts of Europe, but gradually they've been reintroduced from feral populations, not from true wild populations. And it's again the same sort of situation like with feral cats and wild cats. What is a feral animal from its domestic stock, and what is a truly wild animal? And there's a lot of hybridization between true wild horses and domestic horses, or feral horses being domestic horses. So domestication happened actually quite late compared to other animals. Remember, most domestic animals were done so around 9,000, 8,000 years ago. Horses, and they were all done around the Fertile Crescent, which is around Turkey, Iraq, those areas. And horses were only domesticated around 4,000 years ago, so 4,000 years after the domestication of cattle, chickens, pigs, goats, etc. The earliest documented signs came from Kazakhstan and Ukraine, two beautiful grassland areas where horses thrived, and the people in those areas would have obviously learned to domesticate horses. But by 2000 BC, horses were a staple in pretty much every kingdom around the world, in the old world, not so much the new world, they didn't have them there. Whether you were in China or whether you were in ancient Germany, or whether you were in Italy or North Africa, people were riding horses. It was just, you had about 2,000 years of domestication. They were everywhere in the old world, and it was well accepted. So horse breed types are something quite interesting as well. So horse breed types are placed into three groups based on their physical appearance. These terms have nothing to do with ectothermy and endothermy. So when I say these terms, there's nothing to do with the actual temperature of their blood. So they are hot bloods, warm bloods, and cold bloods. And this has nothing to do with the temperature. This is to do with the behavior. So there are over 350 recognized horse breeds. We're not going to get into all of them today. So hot bloods originate from the Middle East. Again, there's a variety of breeds. They're fast, agile, and highly intelligent. And they're all bred for warfare and racing, and they're well suited for arid conditions. They're tough as nails, but they're lightning quick, but they're mercurial. Something you want in a battle horse, something you want in a racehorse, something you don't want in a workhorse. Cold bloods originated from Northern Europe, and they're draft horses, slow, calm, and tough, ideal for knights, who were heavy and wore a lot of armor and needed calm horses that weren't necessarily needing to be, impetuous and energetic, but could just basically be calm and methodical. Good for labor as well, because you don't want an animal spooking when you're working with machinery or with equipment. You just want a dumb, stupid animal that just plods away and just does his thing. And that's what they were bred for. And also they could handle the cold far better than the hot bloods. Warm bloods originate from Europe, but they were initially taken from interbreeding the Arabian hot bloods and the European cold bloods. And they're ideal for everyman horses. They're good speed, calm demeanor, and they're nice, ideal starter horses for people. Certainly would make them do labor, but they're not going to win any races either. So they're nice in the middle, just ideal for all walks of life. So, and again, with horses and ponies, people use the terms interchangeably, but there are distinct differences between horses and ponies. Ponies are a breed of horses, but they are different. Horses have typically a sleek coat. They're long-legged and lean. Ponies have thick coats. They're short-legged, and they're quite stocky. They're built for more of a mountainous terrain. Horses are built for open grasslands. They're bred for that purpose. So another thing that horses are very important for is antivenom production. I know a lot of people are anti-venom production because of it, but it saves lives. And over 50,000 people a year die from snake bites, and that number would be higher if it wasn't for antivenom. Bear in mind that's nothing compared to the number of people that get killed by other people, but it's still a lot of snake bites every year. So snake bite venom is collected. It is injected into the horses. The horse produces an antivenom. The blood is collected. It goes through various phases of purification. And finally, an antivenom is produced, which they can sell to hospitals, which can save lives. So although it's not particularly wild for the horse survives. And they use the antivenom to save human lives. So, you know, there are people that don't agree with it, but at the end of the day, if your child has been bitten by a snake and you're in a village in Uganda, you know, I think it's for the greater good. So snakes kill 50,000 people annually. This sounds like a lot. Bear in mind that over 400,000 people are murdered annually by other people. So you're 8 times more likely to be killed by another human being than by a snake. Don't worry about snakes. 17 million people die a year from heart attacks. So your Big Mac, KFC, or cigarettes, yes, cigarettes cause heart attacks, are 340 times more likely to kill you than a snake. So I don't want to hear, well, 50,000 people a year die of snakes, therefore we have a justifiable reason to get rid of snakes. And say, well, we now have a justifiable reason to get rid of Big Macs, KFC, and cigarettes. So yeah, 17 million is a lot. A little fun thing over here from my personal experience. I was on Mount Kenya in 2018, and I happened to spot an albino zebra, and I just thought it'd be kind of cool to share it with you guys. Nothing educational there, just I've never seen an albino zebra. I took a photo. That was the best photo I could get. It was about 300 meters away from me, and as you can see, there's a buffalo lingering next to it. And I didn't have a rifle, so I chose not to get closer than that. And also, they were completely wild, and they weren't quite keen on us getting too close. So that was the best photo I could get. So what people don't realize is that zebras are actually highly aggressive, and they're well known for fighting each other, killing each other. You'll find that the stallions will kick young males to death, even the young foals to death. They bite each other's tails off, they bite each other's ears off. And one of the easiest ways of identifying a zebra from far away is looking at its ears. If it's got mangled ears, it's almost 100% a male. And again, just through the bush, if you see a rump disappear into the bush and you look at the tail, that's missing its tail, it's a male, because the males are very, very aggressive. Again, yeah, I took this picture at Tula Tula a few years ago, and again, you can just see males going at it. And people don't realize that they're actually very aggressive animals. They're far more aggressive than elephants, in my opinion. It's just that elephants are bigger. So, military horses. Speaking about aggression horses. Horses and warfare have been intrinsically linked for the greater part of written history. No other animal has had such a decisive role in the rise and fall of empires, kingdoms, and battles. Horses have only really fallen out of favor in the middle of the 20th century. That's because vehicles, man-made vehicles, have outperformed them. That's the only reason we don't really use them anymore. And nevertheless, horses still have many important roles in the military and policing. They're ideal for equestrian units doing border patrol, mountain patrols. Armies around the world still train with horses because they're an integral part of terrain that can't be reached by vehicles. And they're ideal also for fast respond units, you know, getting in and out of areas very quickly, especially mountain-based armies. India has a very, very successful equestrian military unit, for example, as does the British Army. The American Army has an equestrian unit. South African Army does as well, but we won't talk about that. Okay, so the South African Army in the past used to have a very successful, very highly trained equestrian unit, ideal for bush warfare, especially in places where it's difficult to get fuel in and out for vehicles. You can take the horse and their fuel is there, it's grass, so they're quite happy to live in the bush. Police also use it because it's a psychological presence of having a large man on horseback. It's psychologically imposing, and also they can run down criminals. I personally don't think it's that practical, but definitely psychologically, the fact that you loom 3 foot over people around you, it has a lot of presence. And when I've seen police on the beachfront with their horses, you do feel small next to them. So it's definitely a psychological aspect. Horses have been used in battle throughout centuries. In fact, one of the only animals that's been known to turn horses are camels. So the Arabian armies and Arab armies would actually use camels to fight against, camel riders to fight against men on horseback in order to actually keep the European cavalry from actually dominating them. But that's a whole other story. We've discussed it with camel warfare. We did a few classes ago. But horses have been used throughout century from well over 4,000 years ago in military campaigns until the 1940s. So, and much like human armor, horse armor is very much indicative of the cultures, the attitudes, and the value of the time. Horses were an investment. You trained that animal for up to a decade, and a military horse, a battle horse, was a well-trained weapon of war, and there was an investment, and you had to take care of it. So obviously you wanted armor. So armor around the world, everything from the Italian to the Japanese to the French, depending on their style of warfare, would equip and arm their horses in much the same way they are their knights and their cavalry. So one of my favorite over here is this barding armor over here, Persian barding armor. And again, Persian armor technology, Arab armor technology was actually leagues ahead of the Europeans at the time. And that's because they had this wonderful cross current coming from the Asian military techniques and the European military techniques. And they were exposed to different mindsets. And there was kind of a cooking pot of different ideas. And they got to experiment all these cool designs of armor and military technology. And that's why they were actually very efficient at developing all these forms of warfare that the Europeans had never seen and the Asians never seen. And it's one of the reasons why Islam literally exploded overnight in the Middle East, because of this intellectual powerhouse that had formed from a cross current of ideas, and also this military powerhouse that had formed from this blending pot of ideas. So Mongolian horse armor, also an integral part of the Mongolians, and never has a nation that has relied so much on their horses or had such a massive impact because of their horses. The Mongolians fought like a pack of wolves. They would use wolf tactics to bait and attack, and in very similar actual ways to the Zulus that would use with the bullhorn technique. They would fight with their horses, using younger, lighter horses on the flanks with heavier horsemen on the center. But they would act like a pack of wolves, attack with a wing, pull back, drawing out the enemy, and then attack with another wing, pull back, and gradually move backwards and forwards like a pack of wolves, tiring down a large bison or a buffalo and bringing its prey down. And the Mongolians actually studied wolf tactics in order to actually use it. And they would use their horses like a pack of wolves, but en masse, 20, 30,000 at a time. Now, the Mongolians were brought together by a man called Temujin, otherwise known as Genghis Khan. We all know his name, which is the great king. And in his time of about 60 odd years, he forged the largest solid single empire on earth. Although the British Empire was larger, it was broken, it was fractured, it was over various continents. It wasn't one solid homogeneous empire. The Mongolians had the largest empire on earth, not the Romans, not the Chinese, not anyone else. It was the Mongolians during their empire. And by 1279 AD, that's a little bit after the Vikings, the empire ranged from Poland, Eastern Europe, through to pretty much the east of Germany, all the way through to the shores of Japan, and right through to the whole of China. And the only reason why they didn't really get into India was because of the Himalayas, and it made it very difficult to get horses across there. Same as Saudi Arabia, the sheer lack of vegetation didn't benefit their horses, and they never go far as Africa. But they even reached as far as Italy at one point, but they were pushed back. The western branches of the Mongolians were the Scythians and various other Western European tribes that actually were extensions of the Mongolians, but they were Caucasian in their bloodline. And these guys originated on the steppes of Central Asia, just beautiful grasslands for horses. And the horses thrived in this environment, and the people grew alongside their horses. And the Mongolians were intrinsically linked to their horses, and they valued them, and they were very much part of and parcel of their entire life cycle. And the men grew up riding horses from the time they were 6 years old. Mongolians today still have a major appreciation for their horses, and it's a part of their culture. It's on all their artwork. I mean, Mongolians get tattoos of horses today. You go to Ulaanbaatar, the capital, and you'll still see horse sculptures everywhere. It's part of their life cycle. They value horses deeply. They even make an alcohol from horse milk, which is not great. So the Mongolians actually were terrible with siege warfare. And what they had is a habit of using their armies to go around the world, capturing ideas and capturing technology, and then using that technology to conquer other civilizations. So they invaded China, took a bunch of siege weapons from China, and took those siege weapons across West and actually attacked the armies of the great Persian nations of the West with these siege technology. So they were very adaptive in their ideas, and that's why they were so successful, because they were quite receptive to new ideas. And that was the reason why in such a short space of time they built such a large army, because they weren't dogmatic in their beliefs. They were very fluid, much like their warfare. They were very fluid in their ideologies and very adaptable. So Mongolians today still very much practice Their traditional techniques, horseback archery is very popular with them, and they could just rain arrows down on enemies from horseback, and they would operate with pinpoint accuracy. And the Mongolian recurve bow was more powerful than the English longbow. The English longbow was considered to be the super weapon of its time in Europe. It would cut down knights in swaths, but the Mongolian recurve bow was smaller, lighter, a child could operate it, and was more powerful than the English longbow. And the technology never reached Europe, so they were never exposed to it. But simply by virtue of the fact that the Mongolians had to work with less in terms of its environment, they had to become quite adaptive in making bow technology. So they made it out of bow, sinews, leather, and they found very springy types of compound material. So they made these compound recurve bows. They could punch through a knight's armor like no problem. So in recent history, the most recent successful cavalry charge was on the 1st of March 1945, and that was the Battle of Schoonveld, when the Polish army on the side of the Russians actually charged a German position and successfully drove the Germans out of the town of Schoonveld. It is the last successful cavalry charge in history, and 7 Polish cavalrymen were killed in the charge and over 500 Germans. So it was a hell of a success. But after that, anti-cavalry technology became the norm. Also, tank technology was just flourishing, and horses fell out of favor as a main staple of battlefields. Anyway, so thank you for that, guys. It's a little bit of a short and sweet story about the history of horses. If you have any questions, you can post them to me. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to end the session now, and